Happy November, everyone, and welcome to another dynamic episode of the Slave Food Project, where two African American physicians, Dr. Columbus Batiste, cardiologist, and Dr. Eric Walsh, emergency room physician with a doctorate of public health, explore the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food in the creation of health disparities in African American communities, irrespective of income. They discovered that eating a whole food, plant based diet in urban communities is possible and is the key to eliminating health disparities. While the temperatures are decreasing, the diagnosis of diabetes are still increasing. This episode, the physicians will tackle the topic of the incessant growing pandemic of diabetes. The Slave Food team welcomes Dr. Neal Barnard, FACC and President of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, to discuss the vital matter concerning one of the most common health conditions in America, diabetes. Dr. Barnard has led numerous research studies investigating the effects of diet and diabetes, body weight, and chronic pain, including a groundbreaking study of dietary interventions in type 2 diabetes, funded by the National Institute of Health, that paved the way for viewing type 2 diabetes as a potentially reversible condition for many patients. Dr. Barnard has authored more than 100 scientific publications and 20 books for medical and lay readers, and is the editor in chief of the Nutrition Guide for Clinicians, a textbook made available to all U.S. medical students. The Slave Food team will forever appreciate your support. Please continue to spread the word about the Slave Food Project and subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button. So sit back, relax, and grab a healthy snack while you enjoy this episode.
Thanks, Net. Dr. Barnard, what a pleasure. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. It's great to see you, Columbus.
Yes. Great seeing you as well. Eric, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very excited. This is one of my heroes, Dr. Barnard. I've read many of your books and thoroughly always enjoyed them. Even the way I saw cheese had changed when I read the China study. Your book really hit it out of the park. So we really appreciate the work that you've done. I've recommended it to many of my patients who are suffering with certain ailments and gotten good results. So we appreciate you, and we're really excited to have you on.
Well, thank you so much, and right back at you. That you are reaching people with education and inspiration, changing their lives. I'm delighted to be able to be with you today.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, I'll tell you, it's funny. I put something out there. I'm learning the whole social media game, right? And so I put out there a post, and I said, I had your picture on there, put it out there, and someone was like, I just love Dr. Barnard. He's the best ever. And I can't wait for it. And they were like, oh, well, we like you too. And I said, you know what? You don't even have to say I like you too. I said, because I feel the same way. So your reputation precedes you, and it's a pleasure and honor to have you on board here.
Great. Well, thank you.
Yes. So, you know, I'll tell you, I'll kick this off because, you know, it is November, Men's Health, but it's also Diabetes Awareness Month. And, you know, one of the things that I'll share this. I'll tell this oftentimes about my dad. So my dad, I kind of grew up with my dad watching, thinking diabetes was really a part of the culture. It's part of who we are because I saw insulin around the house. I saw syringes. I grew up with him having. I was a pleasant surprise. I probably wasn't meant to be here, but I was meant to be here. And so I oftentimes tell the story that after my dad passed away in August 12th of 2010, that really was the springboard. Your work, the work of Dr. Esselstyn, the work of Dr. Campbell, that really gave me a sense of clarity that I was starting to fall into before his passing. And I realized the fact that, man, if I had just known and been able to grapple some of the work that you had done years prior, that I might not be sitting here because my dad might be here still. All right. And I wouldn't have that impetus to really do the things that we're doing right now to spread the word about the fact that you're really Nostradamus, right? So you predicted. So now I understand that they've come out and they've said that, yes, diabetes can be in remission. it is reversible. And so tell us a little bit about your work, and we'll stop with the accolades, and and let's talk shop a little bit. Let's talk shop a little bit.
Sure. Actually, you're speaking about your father. Let me mention a word kind of from my own life as well. My dad was the diabetes expert for Fargo, North Dakota. Most people have never been there, but they might have seen the movie. And that's where I grew up. But my dad would work at the Fargo clinic, and he'd get home at night about 6 o'clock, 6:30. He'd set his medical bag on the floor, and he'd sit down in the chair and read the paper. I never once heard him say, out of all the people with diabetes that he treated, which is all day, every day, I never once heard him say that anyone ever got better. The whole goal was to slow down the progression of the disease. You're going to have cardiovascular involvement, but let's try to have it occur later. You're going to have eye involvement and involvement of your kidneys, and you may get neuropathy, but let's try to slow it down. And they would check glucose status, and they would keep their needle sharp. And that was kind of the name of the game. But preceding this, we kind of see why. I mean, part of it is that we didn't know then what we know now. But the other thing is that wasn't my father's first career. Our family raised cattle. And his father raised cattle, and his father, as far back as I can trace, and my uncles and my cousins. And he didn't like raising cattle. He wanted to get out of it, and he did. And he said, I'm not going to deal with this anymore. I'm going to go to medical school. But the thing is, we still ate like we were in the cattle business. And we thought that was, you thought you need meat for protein. Didn't we all kind of grow up with that idea? You need iron, and the idea of eating just vegetables or things, that's not going to support you. And so part of the reason that patients never got better is that nutrition was never really given a chance. The patient would come in, might need to lose 30, 40 pounds. And the dietitian, who didn't really know what we know today, would say, well, try to cut calories. You're eating 2,000 calories a day, cut that down to 1,500. Here's a menu that adds up to what we want you to have. And by about 4:30, the patient says, wait a minute, I'm at the end of the list of what you're going to let me eat. I don't want to go hungry. By Wednesday, they don't want to deal with it anymore. So with that kind of not very helpful diet, patients wouldn't follow it. And then they would get into an arm wrestling match with the doctor who says, you're non-compliant. And it's because you're giving them something that no human being can comply with, which is be hungry every day of your life. So it wasn't until much, much later that we started to realize that nutritional interventions can be far more powerful than we had imagined. They can completely change this whole scenario, but food has to be thought of in a completely different way. And I will never forget it. There was, when we started doing our NIH trial, we had done some prior studies that suggested, this, if we do this diet right, this should be powerful. And so it was completely plant-based. There wasn't a drop of chicken fat in it. And we kept oils really low. And we used healthy foods for what was left. We might call them low glycemic index foods, but it really means beans and vegetables, and it does not mean processed junk. But you know what I mean. Anyway, so when we did that, I will never forget, there was a man named Vance who had been a policeman in Washington, D.C. for many years, and he came in and he said, I got diabetes all up and down my family tree. And he said, I'm going to lose a leg. I'm going to go blind. And his father, I remember him telling me, his father had died at 30. And he was 31 when he was diagnosed with diabetes. And he came in to see us many years later. He'd had diabetes for several years. He went on this plant-based diet, and he said, first of all, this is the easiest diet I've ever been on, because you don't tell me to count calories. You don't tell me to not be afraid of carbohydrate. You didn't tell me to not eat potatoes and apples and things. And it's just simple swaps, like instead of meat sauce on my spaghetti, have tomato sauce or whatever. Instead of meat chili, have bean chili. And his hemoglobin A1C, this indicator of blood sugar control, which had been 9.5 to start, which is in a dangerous range, started dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping. His private doctor said, you can't take medication anymore. You don't need it. And his A1C ended up at 5.3, and which is totally normal. And when I saw that value, I got to tell you, Columbus, I wanted to pick up the phone and call my father and say, Dad, we found it. We found a different way of thinking about this disease, which is not to try to slow down the damage, but it's to turn around the disease process. Go into each cell and see if you can restore the insulin sensitivity that has been lost. So anyway, you're talking about your father, reminded me of that. So.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Just before we dive in, I know, Eric, you probably want to jump in because some of the things that Dr. Barnard just mentioned. How'd you dovetail into nutrition? So, I mean, you started out growing up in the family of cattle herders and farmers and everything else like that. Went to med school, but how did you get into nutrition and recognize that, okay, you know what, I want, this is where there's value, because that wasn't popular. It wasn't popular when I did it, and it really wasn't popular when you did it.
And it wasn't popular in Fargo. Well, it was a few things I got to tell you. The year before I went to medical school, I was working in a hospital in Minneapolis, and I was the autopsy assistant. My actual title was morgue attendant. But what that meant was that when anybody died in the hospital, I would help the pathologist do the autopsies. And they knew that I was headed for medical school, so they would use it as really like a teaching laboratory for me. And one day, a man died in the hospital of a massive heart attack, which was probably from eating hospital food, I suppose, but that's another story. Anyway, so he had this massive heart attack, he died, and I prepared the body for the exam. And the pathologist wanted to expose the heart, which you do not do with great delicacy. You just take a scalpel and you cut back the skin. And then he took what looks like a garden clipper and went crunch, crunch through the ribs. And he pulled this big wedge of ribs off the chest and he set the ribs on the table. And then we both had gloves on. So he says, feel this. He sliced open a coronary artery. And I was expecting it to be sort of like rubbery and supple. It was like concrete in there. And I thought, what is this? He says, calcification. He said, that's your bacon and eggs, Neal. And anyway, he would give me these lectures over the autopsy table. And what shocked me was the arteries were not only damaged in the heart where he had his myocardial infarction. They were damaged in the carotids going to his brain. And I thought, if your heart attack hadn't occurred first, you were going to have a stroke. And he had atherosclerosis heading toward his kidneys. Anyway, end of the exam, the pathologist leaves and I had to clean everything up. So I put the ribs back in the chest and I sewed up the skin. And it had been, a fairly long exam. And so I then went upstairs to find the cafeteria in the hospital. And when I went up to the cafeteria line, they were serving ribs for lunch. And I looked at it and I thought, that just looks just like this body I was working on. And it smelled like it. And I don't know what you'd call that. I didn't become a vegetarian on the spot, but I knew I couldn't eat that. I just couldn't. And as time went on, somehow these connections between what we eat and what kills us started to make more and more kind of sense to me. Anyway, as time went on, much later, I was approached by a foundation, a research foundation for diabetes. And they said, we are tired of giving out grants to people who want money to do rat experiments and mouse experiments and things that we don't think are really going to lead to what people need. And they said, what would you do? And I said, well, first of all, if I were you, I would study human beings. And secondly, I would study the diet that people are following. That I think has got to be the priority. And they said, okay, help us design the trial. So based on the epidemiology, it seemed clear to me that the less animal products people eat, the healthier their diet's going to be, despite the fact that that had zero to do with how I was raised. But that's what we started to study. And the first trial was very small. It was 13 starters, only 11 finishers. But the effect of the diet was so profound that we started exploring it more and more and more. And that's what led us to do these larger and more sophisticated trials.
That's great. That's great. That's great.
Yeah, I think for as a physician, but even especially being African American in America, I mean, diabetes. Columbus is. I never really thought about it the way Columbus just said it, but it really is so ubiquitous that in many of our churches, you go into our churches, half the people over 30 years old or 40 years old, whatever the number we find, are diabetic, and it's just an accepted reality. And I guess what's frightening, just listening to you, is that there's so few physicians who are telling people that, in fact, you have an option. This isn't the only way. There is something else that can be done to reverse this disease. And I remember reading some of the, just thinking back on some of your books, something you mentioned earlier about oils. You said it was low in oils. Now, we were trained, in medicine. I mean, you look at the hype around the Mediterranean diet and olive oil and oils in general, and there's a big push for us to take oils and to get omega-3s and so forth. I would love for you to talk a little bit about oil, because this is literally one of the most difficult conversations I have now is the conversation around oil consumption and its dangers. And I would love to have you speak to that, just because I know you can address that well.
Sure. Well, thanks for asking about that. People are halfway right when they say, well, olive oil's got to be a healthier oil. I mean, it is better than chicken fat, that's for sure. And the reason I say that is oils and fats, they're all mixtures. So chicken fat is about 30% saturated fat. That's the one that raises cholesterol. That's the one that's linked to Alzheimer's disease and so forth. For olive oil, it's not 30%, it's about 14%. So if I didn't use oil, let's say I had a nonstick pan, then I'm down to 0. And which is kind of where I want to be when it comes to saturated fat. But the other piece of it goes really to the cause of diabetes. And diabetes is not caused by eating bread. It is not caused by eating rice. It is not caused by starches and healthy sugars. And although that's what's on people's mind, it's caused by eating fats. And I know that surprises people. And we were not aware of this when I was a kid, and many people haven't really caught on to it today. But when people eat fatty foods, ham sandwich with greasy mayonnaise and cheese, that fat goes through the bloodstream. It gets inside the cells of the body. It insinuates its way into your muscle cells and into your liver cells. And when that happens, the natural insulin that your body makes that goes to the surface of that cell, that insulin's job is to open that cell up to let glucose inside. But if it's all full of fat, the insulin, it gets kind of befuddled. It's like having a key to your front door, but your front door it's filled with chewing gum or something. It's not going to work. There's nothing wrong with your key, but your key can't work if the lock is gummed up. Well, fats do that. So there are animal fats, cheese, chicken fat, beef fat, fish fat, that gets inside your cells and interferes with.
You're scaring people with cheese now. You're scaring people with cheese.
We got to talk a lot more about cheese, I think, today. So let's keep going.
Yes.
Well, it does smell like old socks, but for some reason people get hooked on it. But oils are healthier than animal fats. But when it comes to either weight loss or cleaning out your cells, we keep them to a minimum too. And that's tricky for people to do, but you can do it. Cook without adding oils. And even though nuts and seeds are healthy foods in and of themselves, when a person is trying to lose weight or reverse diabetes, during those circumstances, we're going to keep those foods pretty low too. I got to tell you something. By the way, you mentioned the Mediterranean diet. We did a study last year that we published where just what you said is exactly right. People think, oh, the Mediterranean diet's got great. It's just a great thing. It's got to be wonderful. What they really mean is, wouldn't it be romantic to be on the coast of southern Italy, sipping some red wine while the sun goes down? That's what they mean. They're not really thinking about what the Mediterranean diet means. But what it means is it's sort of halfway towards vegetarian. It's less meat, less dairy, more vegetables, more fruits, but not quite there. So, but then they're kind of enthusiastic about oils and oily foods. So we brought in 64 people who wanted to lose weight. Half of them went on a Mediterranean diet, just like I described. The other half went on a completely plant-based diet, vegan diet, with very little oil. The Mediterranean group, by about week 3, was ready to scream, because they were following this diet. They came in every week. They were following instructions. They were not losing weight. Why not? Because there's still fish in the diet. The fish is fatty, and every fat gram has 9 calories. There's still a lot of oil. The vegan group was losing weight like crazy. After 16 weeks, they stopped. They switched diets. The Mediterranean group now went vegan and started losing weight. The vegan group now was asked to start the Mediterranean diet. Their weight loss stopped. They started regaining weight. Why? They're eating fatty fish, they're eating some dairy, they're eating some eggs and so forth. What we discovered A Mediterranean diet sounds lovely. But if a person's trying to knock off some pounds or lose weight, let's go about 2 steps further. Let's just take the animal products off our plate. Let's minimize those oils. Don't worry so much about the quantity that you're eating, but put those healthy vegetables and fruits and beans and grains on your plate. And that's the power.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. No, that's huge. That's the key point. And it probably answers this question I have for you, but I want to bring it back a little full circle, because we know the United States, in terms of chronic disease, that we lead. We live sicker and we tend to die sooner as it relates to chronic disease compared to other industrialized countries. But really, when you look at communities of color, what do you think is one of the contributors to the disparities in terms of the burden of diabetes, and even further on, the complications from diabetes, the amputations, the strokes, the kidney failure that results from having diabetes, that tends to plague really our healthcare system and communities and families specifically?
Well, I think what you said earlier is exactly right. The system is absolutely working against communities of color in every way. And it's partly economic, but not entirely. But it does have to do with attitudes. It has to do with access to care, access to decent food. And all of those things are structural things that must change. That said, in our research studies, we did a diabetes trial. About half the patients were white participants with diabetes. The other half were Black participants with diabetes. And I want to tell you, when you use the same intervention, everybody gets healthier together. It is for a person who says, this won't work for me, this can't work for my family. That's not what we've seen. We've seen that with the same amount of support, the same kinds of healthful foods, it really, really works. That research study does nothing to tackle racism. It does nothing to tackle structural issues. It does nothing to tackle stresses that affect a family. And they can not only do that, but it also makes it harder to find the healthful foods and harder to stick with a healthy diet if you got to work 2 jobs or 3 jobs. I mean, these are all issues bigger than a single research study. But the point is, if anybody feels like I've got my genes working against me, no. We can use healthful foods, and the most powerful foods are, in some ways, the simplest ones. They're the kind of, in some cases, the ones our great grandparents knew about. People nowadays, what is a bean? Well, our grandparents knew what beans were, and they knew what vegetables and fruits were, and these are the cheapest kinds of foods. And today they've kind of given way to other sorts of things. But anyway.
No, I'll just follow that up, Eric, before you jump in there and say that I wouldn't minimize that study that really demonstrated the power of nutrition across all genders, across all ethnicities, because I think one of the things that many people begin to fall into this false belief system is that they have no control, that it's their destiny, that this is just who I am, that somehow I'm inferior and I'm just subject to developing, this is my destiny. And in fact, what studies like yours do is they prove in a scientific fashion that that's not the case, that we're more alike than we are dissimilar, and that, yes, it is, there's circumstances that it's a social construct that oftentimes leads to the demise of many individuals across demographics. So that's huge. It's extremely powerful.
There are also companies working really hard to make sure that the most unhealthful foods are dangled in front of you every minute of the day. And I'm talking about cheese, dairy, meat, candy, sodas, all of these things. They are ubiquitous. And there was just a report out from the University of Connecticut that said when you look at marketing of particularly fast foods is disproportionately targeted toward communities of color, particularly young Black youth and Hispanic youth, disproportionately so. I want to tell you something. I had a talk with my hospital CEO, George Washington University Hospital. We were talking about marketing, and we were talking about here, I'm in Washington, D.C. right now. And if you look at colorectal cancer death rates, who dies from colon cancer? The death rates are lowest in the more economically advantaged part of town. The death rates are highest in the more economically disadvantaged part of town. And we talk about the marketing of foods and where are fast foods being marketed and that kind of stuff. And I showed her a picture of a big display of bacon and sausage served up in a food service. And we talked about the fact that that display of those foods, which we know cause colorectal cancer, these processed meats are strongly linked to colorectal cancer. That picture was taken in our hospital.
Wow.
In other words,
Wow.
we're part of the marketing too. A person comes in, you come into our hospital because you got to have an appendectomy, or you got a hip replacement, or whatever it may be, or you're a visitor. And the hospital gives its imprimatur to these most unhealthful foods. So in the same way as a generation ago, we decided we had to ban smoking. We got to ban unhealthy foods. Now, I got a confession to make to you. A generation ago, when I was a resident, I would walk in the hospital and I would buy Merit menthols in the hospital gift shop, and I lit up. And my head of surgery was lighting Marlboros, and we'd walk together down the hallway smoking, and nobody thought anything about it. That's the way it was. Now, people nowadays they may not remember that. You could smoke in any hospital in the United States back in 1980. And we weren't stupid. We knew that it caused cancer, but we also knew it took time to get cancer. And I'm under stress right now, so I'll quit later on. But at some point we realized it's not so much that you're smoking today in the hospital is going to give you cancer. It's that you're setting an example for all the patients and all the staff and all their kids. And so we made a decision. That's to throw the cigarettes out of the gift shop. And frankly, that helped me quit. But then we've got to have a kind of a word of the cafeteria, which is to say, when people come in, let's use this as a teachable moment and have foods that are healthy, but that taste good. So to the credit of hospitals now, they're starting to recognize that educational function. They're taking it in their hands. And the beneficiaries are not just the patients and the visitors and the staff. It's that entire community for which that hospital can be a center of education.
Yeah. No, that's huge. And I see that. I see that after doing procedures where family brings in foods that put them on the table in front of me to start off. And so I think really the work you're doing, that we're doing, I think it's important to be adjunctive to the hospitals here. But I want to go back a little bit because you packed that answer with a ton of information there. You spoke about the dairy industry, you spoke about the advertisement, and that's one of the things I love about how you've constructed the PCRM from the arms of research. We spoke about this earlier behind the scenes, as well as looking into the why and investigations and seeing what goes on to the subsidies and so forth. And speak about that work that's done with you all investigating, investigatory type of efforts to pull up like the dairy checkoff and so forth.
We have a long ways to go to really change this. Other countries have done a better job in some ways. In Canada, the dietary guidelines were recently reformulated and they threw industry out. They said, don't you tell us what's a healthful diet. And so instead of saying you need to have 3 glasses of milk every day, they said the only beverage you actually need physiologically is water. And they made a big pitch for vegetables and fruits and plant-based foods and that kind of thing. Not exclusively, but a lot better than we see here in the US. In the United States, for very unfortunate reasons, there has been a real emphasis on dairy products and meat and eggs. And these industries have a lot of money to spend on lobbying and on political pressure, and they've been very successful. And when we were kids, we thought, well, that's good because you need the calcium in milk and it's a good thing for you. But in the late 1990s, some troubling research came out. And that's that we started to notice that prostate cancer, which is one of the big killers of men, is particularly common in milk drinking men. And at first we thought, well, that's got to be a coincidence. Harvard University did the Physicians' Health Study. They showed that milk drinking men had 34% higher risk of fatal prostate cancer. Coincidence? Maybe. They then did a follow-up study, much larger, the Health Professionals Follow-up Study. And the connection was even a little bit stronger. Many more studies have been done, and they were summarized on, I believe it was 2016. There was a really good meta-analysis putting all the literature together, and they basically said, believe it. And it's not a coincidence. Milk is designed to fatten up a calf, to help a calf grow. So when you drink it, it increases in your blood something called insulin-like growth factor that causes a calf to grow and a baby to grow and a cancer cell to grow. So The dairy industry ignores this, wants you to ignore it. And to this day, there is a law that says, let's say I'm a kid. I'm 15 years old. I'm pushing my tray down the lunch line, and they're offering me cow's milk. And I say, I don't want that. I don't want that. Not only am I concerned about the prostate cancer that my grandfather had, but I frankly can't digest that very well. I got lactose intolerance. You know, we used to call that a disease, until we realized that's not a disease. That is the normal human response to taking the lactose sugar into your body. It's the absolute norm. But anyway, if let's say that teenager says, I can have almond milk, I can drink that fine. He can't have it. By law, he cannot be given almond milk, soy milk, rice milk, any of these things, unless he produces a note from a doctor or a parent saying that he has a medical condition or a disability. Now, you tell me, why am I going to make a teenager walk in with a note saying, I'm disabled, give me almond milk? That lactose intolerance is an absolutely normal condition. And anyway, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've been really fighting against that kind of thing. The dairy industry works very hard to keep it there. I think we're going to win on this. I think we are going to win. I think we're going to see that kind of marketing drift away. But it's very much like the tobacco industry. They fought for a long time. And eventually the tobacco industry lost. There is not a person in America who doesn't know that tobacco is bad.
Yeah.
But the battles over food are much more protracted.
But that's a problem, though. I mean, it's a problem. It's a difference between advertisement and between law, right? Yeah. It's a difference between the requirement that I have to have this milk on my tray that evidence shows is harmful. And I don't even need evidence, because when I ingest it, my body goes through all sorts of gesticulations that's not ideal. And so to have that law passed, I mean, that's why agencies like yours are so important to bring this to light to individuals out there, what's happening. So
every 5 years, the dietary guidelines for Americans are reformulated. And in the year 2000, we, through the Freedom of Information Act, asked who was on the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. There were 11 people on the committee. We got their CVs, their resumes, and we found that 6 of the 11 had links to the dairy industry or meat or egg industry. We brought a lawsuit in federal district court for the District of Columbia. We said, wait a minute, you can have an advisory committee. They can even have some industry ties, but it's got to be transparent, it's got to be balanced, and this was hidden. We won that lawsuit. And that busted open the process by which the guidelines are reformulated. So every 5 years, this committee comes together, and it's different people each time. And there is a auditorium at the USDA, big auditorium. The committee sits on the stage in the front, and there's a microphone at the front. And one by one, people come up to the microphone, and they can say what they want to about the dietary guidelines. And the first person stands up and says, I'm with the Dairy Association. Don't forget, we need calcium. The next person stands up and says, I'm with the beef industry. Don't forget, we need iron. The next person comes up and says, I'm with the liquor industry. A drink a day will calm you down. And by the end of the afternoon, the committee just has their heads in their hands. They have been pummeled by all these industry representatives. About 15 years ago, we started to send doctors to speak. And teachers and school nurses saying, let me tell you what I'm seeing in my school. And so we are coming up to 2025. In 2023, 24, they're going to start that process again. And what I would like to do is to pack that auditorium with people who are not thinking about what you can sell to people, and not thinking about things that you can get people hooked on, but let's think about what's going to help the next generation to be healthier. And the people on that committee are, for the most part, honest people who can listen to reason and review research. And if we can crowd out some of this noise, I think we can win.
Yeah, we have to. We have to. You know, what was the saying that was said many interviews ago? The business of business is business. It's not health. Business of business is business.
They're trying to make money, and they don't mind making money off of people. At the cost of the person's health, because to them there's a million ways that they justify it, and part of it is what you said. I mean, they need calcium, they need iron, so that they don't tell you that the iron you get from meat is not like the iron you get from spinach, and it's actually destructive. They don't tell you those things, but I want to say to our audience that the work that you do is critical in protecting people who don't know that all these things are going on, bringing not just information and enlightenment, but actually going to the root of the tree. Right? It's at the root. If you attack the root, you change the fruit. We've got to go at the root of the problem, change what is being produced, because some of these schools. My mother was a single mother. There were 3 of us. We never got government funds. The only thing we ever got was government, the free lunch at school. And looking back on it, it was probably the worst possible thing we really could have been fed at the time. It was pizza, it was French fries, it was burgers, and tons of milk, chocolate milk, white milk. I think a treat, you'd get strawberry milk once in a blue moon. And all of this was designed to make you think that is food. So, it changes the way you see the world of food as a child. If an authoritarian place like a school, this is how they feed me. Just like when you're sick and you go into a hospital and they feed you the same food, it reendorses the idea that this is what is normal, this is what is good. And so the work that you're doing is, I want everyone that listens to us to really support it, buy the books, read through these books. I want you to talk a little bit about cheese if you get a chance, because this is the other thing. Oil is not really number one. Cheese probably actually is number one. People do not want to give up cheese, and a part of it is because of some of the addictive properties mildly addictive properties that you describe in the book, but also it's just ubiquitous. There's cheese in the crust of pizza now. You think about that for a second. So that tells you that this industry is very powerful. But what is this product really doing to us?
Yeah, and by the way, on a more optimistic note, I don't want people to think that nobody will ever change. People will change, and people are not necessarily waiting for the government to tell them it's okay.
Right.
You go into a store. The dairy case used to be the dairy case. Now you look at the dairy case, and there is some cow's milk there, but there's soy milk, rice milk, oat milk, almond milk, hemp milk, pea protein milk. The choices are there now for people.
Very true.
And the same is true with some of the cheeses as well, where you see the vegan products, at least to a degree. And we discovered that this will work with children. Years ago, we did a study in a school, and with a school where there's a fairly high proportion of kids who are lactose intolerant. And so we set up a little table, and the table had vanilla soy milk on it. Who wants to try some vanilla soy milk? And the kid would, I'll give it a try. And a little cup of vanilla soy milk. And, oh, that's pretty good. Can I have some more? Great. Who wants to try chocolate soy milk? Well, I'll try that. And they would try that. And the kids had a chance to just taste it. The next day, vanilla soy milk, chocolate soy milk in the lunch line to see would kids take it? Would they take the cow's milk? This was just an experiment that we did with the school's cooperation. Outsold everything because it tasted fine. They had a chance to get familiar with it. And my point is that this is not rocket science. People can adopt healthier habits just like that, given access, given familiarity, given a chance to get over the kind of nervousness that we have. Anyway, you asked me about cheese. Cheese is something we all get hooked on. And when we do research studies and we ask our participants, they've lost weight. Their diabetes has improved. They feel better than they felt in years. But a fair number will say, yeah, but the one food I really miss is cheese, and we can make it easier on them by putting some nutritional yeast in their spaghetti sauce and things that gives them the cheesy flavor without the guilt. But cheese itself is such a surprise that I wanted to really look into why it is so unhealthy. And the first thing is that it's 70% fat, typical cheeses. And it's not just any kind of fat. It's mostly the saturated fat, the kind that is linked to Alzheimer's disease and high cholesterol levels. And surprisingly enough, it also has hormones in it. People think, hormones in cheese? Yes, it's got estradiol. Why? Because cows are artificially inseminated annually. I mean, a cow's not going to make milk if she hasn't had a baby. I mean, that's biology 101. And to keep her pregnant, they're inseminated every year. They have a 9-month gestation. During that time, they are milked for much of their pregnancy. The estradiol in their body gets into their bloodstream and into the milk, and every scoop of ice cream you ever had, every slice of cheese you ever had, every bit of yogurt, it has estradiol in it. And you think, okay, for my 7-year-old son, how much female sex hormone do I want him to have? Or my 8-year-old daughter, do I really want her to have that either? And at fertility clinics, when men have been assessed, now the couple goes in, they're getting tested for why are they having so much trouble conceiving. When we look at a sperm count, we look at absolute number of sperm. We look at their shape. We look at their motility. Do they move straight? And all of those things are altered to the extent that men have cheese in their diet. Researchers have been looking at dietary indicators or correlations with fertility, and cheese came out at the top of the list. And at first you thought, cheese? And of course, researchers realized it's because of the estrogens. It's not a lot, but male fertility is kind of a delicate thing. And if you're putting a little bit of estradiol in your bloodstream, that's all it takes to interfere with that. Now, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are many, many, many other issues to it. But the reason people get hooked on it, partly it's fatty. It's very salty. Salt is added to cheese. There's more salt in cheese than in potato chips. But the other thing is that there are very mild opiates called casomorphins that are in the dairy protein, and they're concentrated in cheese. So that's why we kind of get hooked on it. And the average American, before 1909, when the USDA started tracking, the average American ate less than 4 pounds in a year. It was not our thing. But marketing works. And so today, the average American consumes 4 pounds? I don't think so. Making that about 37 pounds of cheese and all that fat. And that was last year and this year and next year. And it takes only maybe a couple of those 37 pounds to stick to explain the obesity problem we have in America.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, cheese is something that when I talk to my patients, that is a consistent thing that's there, is the cheese. But, the other one, though, I'll be honest, and I'm usually very truthful with my patients, and when I kind of give talks, is that, I am a recovering sugarholic and snackaholic too as well, right? I have been delivered in part. I just can't go around it too much there at all. So speak to that a little bit, as we kind of turn the corner here about, there's an onslaught of ultra processed foods. Their relationship to our health, both cardiovascular, diabetes as well, prostate and so forth. What are your thoughts?
If you took some sugar cane and you were to chew on that a little bit, it would be sweet, it would be tasty, but you wouldn't get very far because it's got natural fiber in it. But if you made a factory that could extract that sugar and throw out all the fiber and all the pulp, now you're getting somewhere. And sugar dissolves. So if you dissolve it into water, you can put 16, 17, 18 teaspoons in one soda, and you can mix it into cookie dough. And so that sugar will hide there. But the sugar then makes you attracted to the cookie, and then mixed into it is butter or shortening, which is actually more than twice the calories of the sugar. So it's kind of the Trojan horse. The sugar lures you in, and then all that fat is inside, and so you get really the double whammy. And I think that's really our big problem. If you had an apple, that's got sugar in it, but the sugar is mixed with fiber and water, and it's kind of that more subtle flavor of sort of diluted sugars. And nobody ever binged. Nobody had 8 apples in a day. But I guarantee you that a lot of people had 8 cookies in a day. Because it calls your name. So anyway, that's where we are. But you are not alone. I mean, everybody listening to you is thinking, so am I. And because frankly, we are designed by nature, if I can put it that way, to like sweet things. Because before there were cookie factories, there was the sweet taste of fruit. And that was sustaining. And our taste buds draw us to that. And that's all perfectly fine. And then when somebody figured out how to make these processed foods that trigger that same attraction, It's something our body was not really designed to resist.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that that's something that I think is equally as important to draw out as it terms to nutritional resiliency and what we're eating towards our health as opposed to our demise, I think in general. So I think bringing to light some of the aspects of ultra processed food is important. I always remember about a gentleman who I met down in New Orleans. And, after a hour-long ride, stuck inside the traffic, all I could convince him to do was to try an alternative meat substitute burger. He would not hear me about any vegetables, anything else. I only want to listen to you talk about it, because if I know better, I'll have to do better. I don't want to know. But finally, at the end of the hour, he finally committed. And I'll tell you, I felt like this is one of my top 10 successes, just to get him to open that door and crack it towards it. So I think some of the, so I don't know what your thoughts are about some of the alternative meats and things of that nature, since we have you on, and give your input with some of those as well.
Well, I think alternative meats, for decades, people have made the veggie burger because it's healthier than the meat burger. And so they were made with black beans and different things. And the fat content was really pretty low. And people thought of them as substantially healthier than the meat burger, and they were. However, a few years ago, researchers started thinking, well, it doesn't taste enough like meat to really lure in a real meat eater. So they made the Impossible Burger and other things. And they packed in so much fat in it that it's no, don't get me wrong. It is better than a meat burger. There's no question. But it is not like the old fashioned, really low fat burgers. And so I view the Impossible Burger, I think it's got an important function. It has the function of methadone. It is like for a heroin addict uses methadone to kind of ease away. The meat addict can use that Impossible Burger to prove to themselves that they don't really need meat, but use that as a transition to those healthier kinds of foods. Now that said, there are still plenty of products that are fake meats and fake bacon and there are things that taste just like fish and so forth. And frankly, I think they serve a useful role for kids. If it's birthday and you're having veggie hot dogs, the other kids are going to eat them. They're okay. If you bring out lentil loaf, they might not really want it. So I think there's something to be said for those foods, but I think of them as more, they serve kind of an educational function, a transition function to help you realize that maybe I don't really have to have meat in my diet.
Love it.
I guess one of the things I would like to, kind of, because we do want to, we're trying to create a bit of a movement around a whole food, plant-based lifestyle and understanding the connection between stressors in society and diet and health outcomes and so forth. How can we help you? And, how can people get involved? I definitely think everyone should buy the books and read them and follow your pages and so forth. But what's your advice on how we can be involved and how we can support what you're doing? It's some of the most important work, honestly, being done in America when you consider the value of health and the problem of health disparities. So just love to hear your take on how we can get involved and help out.
Oh, well, thank you so much for asking about that. Frankly, this is a team effort and we're all working hard. I know you are working nonstop in this exact same way. And Columbus, the way you've supported the conferences and things that we're doing and sharing your knowledge and your inspiration is just wonderful. So I think we have to keep working in every venue that we can. We have an initiative now for hospitals to clean up their food. And any hospital that we're affiliated with, we can do that. Here in DC, we had more than 100 doctors sign on to our request to all the hospital CEOs to clean up the hospitals. And we realized that the dietary manager might not listen to the doctors, but the hospital CEO sure does. And that's the person who writes the check for the consulting companies to run the catering. So those are things we can do with schools. When people have kids in school, to be able to talk to the principal and say, we need to have healthier options here. They're under constraints, but we really do need to fight to the extent that we can. When people have medical practice, I always encourage them to talk to their clinic manager and say one thing. For every patient who's got diabetes, I want you to code in an order that goes into the electronic medical record. At checkout, I want you to hand them a piece of paper that says, go to foodinstructions.org. And we actually provide this, even a QR code. So the patient's got diabetes, they check out, and the checkout person says, I have to give you this. It's a piece of paper, it's got the QR code on it, or just that website, which is foodinstructions.org. They shoot it with their phone, and it brings them up to free videos that are really short and really kind of cute. And there are about a half a dozen that say, here's where diabetes comes from. Here's what I do about it. And the whole point was, we've been working with clinics where people don't have a dietitian. And the doctors say, I don't have time to really be a food coach for every single person who comes in. So we made this as kind of the next best thing.
Awesome.
So these are all things that people can do.
That's awesome. I'll use that with our patients. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's I like that a lot. That's extremely creative and so forth. So I like that an awful lot. Very good.
And let's work together politically. There are subsidies that are going in the wrong direction. These things are hard to change, but they can change. And if we can partner together to change the dietary guidelines when they come up, it's one of the more democratic parts of federal policy, meaning the public does have input. And I would value the opportunity to work with you as we work together to change that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to, as we wrap things up, I definitely want you to touch on briefly, if you don't mind, the concept, just re-hone on it about diabetes being reversible and it's not the destiny. And I know there's a number of different trials. There's recent guidelines speaking to that in terms of that it can be remission. For those out there who may feel encumbered by their medications, bombarded on TV advertisement, their doctors who may not be aware. As an aside, I'll tell you, I just saw a patient today who mentioned to me, interestingly enough, that every time that they went eating more whole food plant-based, all of a sudden for the male, his erections increased and awoke with them, and that his blood sugars improving, he lost weight. After when the pandemic struck, he went the opposite direction and struggled. Then he started having chest pain, which is why he came to see me, and started all of a sudden, realized as he started transitioning his diet again, all of a sudden things started to spring up again. And so and so speak to the idea of reversibility, because I want to empower people going back again to the core component, which is let's end this, the end game for diabetes.
Yes, people are skeptical that these things can change because, as we've been discussing, I've got diabetes in my family tree, say it's just going to happen to me and it's in my genes. And I think people are right to be skeptical because there's so many people pushing so many theories. It's understandable and even reasonable for people to have skepticism about it. So when it comes to the idea of a whole food plant-based diet, and a person might think, gee, I wonder if this is really okay. They don't have to set aside their skepticism. What I ask them to do as a clinician, and what people listening to this can do if they're thinking, maybe I'd like to try it, is just break this change into 2 steps and just try it yourself, just like driving a new car. See if you like it before you buy. Step 1, take a week. And during this week, don't take anything out of your diet at all. Just take 7 days and make a list of foods that you would eat if you were following a plant-based diet. And just think about it. Okay, in the morning, I have cornflakes with milk. What could I have? I guess I could have almond milk, but I never tasted it. You got a week, try it. I have sausage in the morning. I guess I could try the veggie sausage. I don't know if it's any good. You got a week, try it. Every night I go Chinese. I guess they've got tofu and vegetables. Are they in? I've never had it. You got a week, try it. So you're taking a week and you're just trying out these foods. And if you don't like them, you don't write them down. But by the end of 7 days, everyone comes back. They got all kinds of stuff that they like. Now, step 2, 3 weeks. Now we're going to take out of the diet all the animal products. We're going to go vegan. But that's easy because it's only 21 days and you've already made your list of all the foods that you do like. At the end of those 21 days, physically people are changing. Just what you were saying, Columbus. People feel lighter. Their sexual functioning is starting to get better. The pounds are coming off. If they got diabetes, their blood sugars are coming down. Their insulin requirements are coming down. But beyond the physical changes, if you haven't had chicken wings in about 3 weeks, you just kind of aren't thinking about it so much. And you're discovering new foods, new websites, new books, new movies, new people, all kinds of other people who've been doing this, wondering where you are. And so at that point, it's easier to decide, I kind of like this. So I never ask a patient to give up their skepticism or what. I've got to try, put the shoes on, walk around, see how they fit. And once a person's doing that with the diet, after doing a 3-week test drive, people just don't want to go back.
Yeah. I don't know if people caught what you said, the pearls of wisdom and what you just said, that you just acknowledged everyone's culture. You went around the table and you highlighted the fact that you can actually have health promoting foods in every culture, whether or not it's an Asian food, whether or not it's in Mexican food, whether or not it's in any particular type of cuisine, that there's plant-based options that are there. I think that's the power of nutrition and the power of empathy, of recognizing a person where they're at and start meeting them where they're at in the road. So I appreciate that so much.
And it's the patient's choice. Doctors aren't, you're not the patient's employer. You're not their parent. You can't be telling them what to do, but what you are is a darn good coach. And when the person says, I want to see if I can make this work. Okay, great. How would you interpret it for breakfast? Here's what I'd do. And it can be your culture or it can be something else that you want to try. And frankly, my Fargo, North Dakota culture wasn't the best. So to tell you the truth, I'm learning from everybody around me now that I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I've learned quite a lot, I'm happy to say. But people can make whatever choice they want to for themselves. And our job as doctors is to support them. And when they mess up, we don't wag our finger. We help everybody to dust themselves off and get going from there.
That's right. Love it. Love it. Love it. What's next on the horizon for you? We know your book recently came out. Was that a year ago? Maybe it was. What was it? The Power
Your Body and Balance.
Yes.
Your Body and Balance came out just as the pandemic was starting.
That was a phenomenal book. Let me just jump in and say that was. I think I listened to it on Audible 3 times. Phenomenal, phenomenal book, and I really highly recommend everyone read that book, listen to it on Audible, but get that book and check it out.
Yes.
Thank you for saying that. We're continuing to explore how foods can affect hormones, as in diabetes, as in menstrual issues for young women, or menopausal issues for women at the end of their reproductive times, thyroid diseases, all these things. It's not just weight and diabetes and heart disease. So many parts of our biology are influenced by these simple food choices, and it's really exciting to see what we can do.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure and honor to tap into your wisdom and your knowledge during this session. I know that everyone who's tuning in right now has been blessed. They're better off now after this hour than they were coming into this hour. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts, for sure.
Well, thank you for letting me spend this time with you. Thanks for all the great things you're doing.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. And so I want you to stay on, Dr. Barnard, for a moment. And just to those out there who are listening, appreciate you spending your Friday evenings with us. We're going to be back next week for a Friendsgiving special. We're going to try and put some of these things into action. And we're going to be joined by Donna Green Goodman and Deetra Dennis, a friend of PCRM. And they are going to cook up some healthy food for us. And so looking forward to that. Although I won't be able to taste it, I'm going to salivate through the screen a bit there. So stay tuned next week. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next week. Thank you to Dr. Barnard. Buy his book if you haven't already.
Absolutely.
Follow him on social media. Check out PCRM and get your jump start with the 21-day kickstart there. Thank you.